Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking a plunge into a really dense and fascinating corner of chemistry, the world of polymerization.
Specifically, we're focusing on what are known as condensation polymers.
Exactly. So if you're looking to get your head around the rules behind polyamides, polyesters, and, why they behave so differently from a standard plastic bag, this is for you.
Our mission today is pretty simple. Distill the definitions, the reaction types, and the key structural ideas you need.
And we want to make it all clear just through sound. No diagrams needed.
Right. We're moving beyond the simple stuff, like your basic addition polymers, and into the chemistry that builds everything from, say, a bulletproof vest to the actual proteins in your body.
And we're starting with a great hook. I mean, we all think of plastics as insulators, right? The casing on a power cord, for instance. But the chapter kicks off with a surprise.
Yeah.
Polymers that can actually conduct electricity.
Yeah, a real game changer.
So the general rule is insulation. What's the structural exception that completely flips that rule on its head?
The classic example is a material called polyethylene. And the key, the absolute structural requirement, is having alternate double and single carbon bonds.
Just a repeating pattern.
A continuous repeating pattern, yeah, all the way down the polymer chain.
Okay, let's break that down because, you can't see the diagram. How does that alternating pattern suddenly free up the electrons to move?
Well, think of it this way. In a normal polymer, all the electrons are kind of locked into localized single bonds. They can't go anywhere.
Stuck in place.
Exactly. But with this alternating system, you create a continuous chain of what we call pi bonding. It's like a molecular highway that runs the whole length of the polymer.
A highway for electrons.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Yeah.
The overlapping orbitals from all those carbons merge together and create these bands of delocalized electrons that are free to move. And if they can move, you can get conduction.
And I see here that these are often improved by something called doping.
Right. Adding a substance like iodine can significantly boost the conductivity.
So what's the big advantage here over, say, copper wire?
Oh, it's huge. They're incredibly lightweight, they don't corrode, and you can shape them so easily. You can make thin films, flexible sheets, things that you just can't do with metals. This is what enables things like flexible LED displays.
That's the exotic end of things. Let's pivot now to the main event, condensation polymerization itself. How would you define this process?
It's basically a two-step dance for every link that forms. The monomers join together, that's the addition part, and then a small molecule gets kicked out. That's the elimination.
Okay, so it's like a handshake where something small gets dropped.
Exactly. Usually it's a molecule of water, H2O, or maybe hydrogen chloride, HCl.
So the final polymer chain isn't just the sum of its parts. It's the sum of its parts minus all those little molecules that got kicked out.
Yes, and that means the monomers themselves have to meet a very specific requirement.
Which is what?
Each monomer has to have two different functional groups that can react with each other. If it only has one, the reaction stops and you don't get a chain.
And there are two main ways this happens, right?
That's right. The first way, you could say, is nature's favorite method.
Yeah, okay.
It's where the two different functional groups are already on the same molecule. The best example is an amino acid. It has an amine group on one end and a carboxylic acid group on the other, all ready to go.
And the second style involves two different players.
Correct. For the second style, you need two different molecules. One molecule might have two amine groups, and the other has two carboxylic acid groups. You just alternate them to build the chain. That's how we make things like Nylon 6,6.
Perfect segue. Let's talk about polyamides. Like nylon, they're all defined by that amide link.
Or a peptide bond, as it's called in biology. It forms between an amine-amine group and a carboxylic acid group.
So for nylon 6,6, you mentioned it's made from 1,5,6 diaminohexene and hexaneoic acid. Those numbers, the 6,6, what do they tell us?
It's a really neat shorthand. They tell you the number of carbon atoms in each of the two monomers. So 6 carbons in the diamine and 6 carbons in the dicarboxylic acid. Simple as that.
Now, nylon is famous for being strong but also elastic.
Yeah.
How do you get that property from just a long chemical chain?
It's all in the manufacturing. There's a process called cold drawing where you literally stretch the polymer.
Okay.
This forces all those long chains to line up neatly side by side. And once they're aligned like that, powerful hydrogen bonds form between the neighboring chains, locking them together.
So it's the bonds between the chains that give it its strength.
That's it. It's this huge network of interchain bonds.
Now let's level up to Kevlar. Bulletproof vests, fighter jets, It's also polyamide, so what makes it so much stronger than nylon?
Kevlar is a different beast.
Hmm.
Its monomers contain these rigid, flat benzene rings. So where nylon chains are kind of flexible, like spaghetti, Kevlar chains are more like ruler-straight, rigid rods.
So that rigidity must have a knock-on effect.
A massive one. Because the chains are so straight, they can pack together in an almost perfect, crystal-like pattern. This maximizes the hydrogen bonding between the chains to an incredible degree.
More contact means more bonds.
Way more. It creates this exceptionally tight, locked structure that's just amazing at absorbing and dissipating energy. That's why it can stop a bullet.
Incredible. So that's the synthetic world. But nature has its own version, right? Proteins.
Absolutely. Proteins are just biochemical polyamides. They're polypeptides formed from alpha-amino acids.
And they're linked by those same amide bonds.
Yep. We just call them peptide bonds in this context. The variety comes from the 20 different side chains, the R groups, which can be polar, nonpolar, or even charged.
And when an amino acid is part of that chain, we don't call it an amino acid anymore, do we?
That's a great point. We call it an amino acid residue. The sequence of those residues is the protein's primary structure.
Okay, let's switch gears one last time to polyesters, the other big family.
Polyesters are formed from the classic esterification reaction. You take a carboxylic acid, you react it with an alcohol, and you get an ester plus water. The link in the polymer chain is that ester group, the text COO group.
Terylene is the big example here, I think.
It is. Terylene is made from a dicarboxylic acid and a diol that's an alcohol with two OH groups. But, maybe the more exciting example today is PLA, or polylactic acid.
Right, the stuff they use for 3D printing and compostable coffee cups.
Exactly. What's cool about PLA is that it's made from a single monomer, lactic acid, which conveniently has both the acid group and the alcohol group on the same molecule.
Which brings us to the really big environmental angle. What happens to all this plastic? Why are the common plastics, the polyalkenes, so bad for the environment?
Well, chemically, they're just giant saturated alkenes. They're nonpolar, they have no reactive sites, so there's nothing for bacteria or water to attack. They're incredibly inert.
Basically, they just sit there forever.
Pretty much. They're non-biodegradable.
So how do polyamides and polyesters offer a solution to this?
Because they are made by condensation, their chains are full of those functional links, the amide link or the ester link, and those links can be broken by hydrolysis. Just adding water, usually with some acid or alkali and a bit of heat, can split the polymer back into its original monomers. Because they can be broken down this way, they're biodegradable.
And the conditions matter, I assume?
They do. Under acidic conditions, like in a hot landfill, you get the original monomers back. Under alkaline conditions, you get the diamine back, but the carboxylic acid becomes a salt. The key thing is, you can break it down.
What about photodegradable polymers? I hear about those as a solution.
It's an interesting idea. They put carbonyl groups into the polymer that absorb UV light from the sun, which breaks the chains.
But there's a catch.
There's a big catch. What happens when it's buried in a landfill? There's no light. So the process just stops. Plus, fragments of these can contaminate a batch of normal recycling, making the whole lot weaker.
Not a perfect solution then. Okay, let's wrap up with some practical skills. How can you look at a structure and figure out what's going on? First, how do you predict the polymer type?
It's all about looking at the monomer. If your monomer has a carbon double bond, a CCC bond, it's going to make an addition polymer. The backbone will just be a long chain of carbon atoms.
And if it's condensation?
If the monomers have two reactive groups, like an amine and an acid, or an alcohol and an acid, it has to be a condensation polymer. And you'll see those telltale functional links, the amide or ester groups, right there in the backbone.
All right, now the real test. You're given the final polymer chain. How do you work backwards to find the monomers it came from?
This is the key skill. First, find the linking group. Is it an amide or an ester?
Sure.
Then you mentally break that bond. And here's the crucial step. You have to reattach the little molecule that was lost. If water was lost, you add an H to one side of the break and an OH to the other. You're just reversing the condensation reaction to get your monomers back.
That's a fantastic way to think about it. Okay, let's do a quick recap.
Sounds good.
We started with the surprise of conducting polyamide, where those alternating double bonds create a literal highway for electrons.
Then we defined condensation polymerization, linking molecules by kicking out a smaller one.
Which gave us our two main families, the polyamides, like strong nylon and super rigid Kevlar, and the polyesters, like terylene, and the very useful biodegradable PLA.
And the absolute core difference to remember is that those functional links, the amide and ester groups, make condensation polymers vulnerable to hydrolysis. That's why they can be biodegradable, unlike the incredibly inert addition polymers.
So, to leave you with a final thought, we need lightweight, high-performance materials, but we also desperately need better ways to manage waste. So how might the chemical industry combine the best of both worlds? Could we see a material with the conductivity of polyethylene, but the biodegradability of PLA?
That intersection of function and sustainability, that really is the future of polymer science.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Good luck with your studies.